Welcome to another episode where I get to speak to incredible leaders from around the world. And today I'm particularly excited because I've got somebody who is slightly different. Well, I say slightly, she's a bit more than slightly different. She's got such a varied life behind her, and I find her to be an incredible human being. I've been following her for a while now on social media, but I've learned so much about her just from her social media content. I think that's a good starting point. I want to welcome to the show today Lucy Griffiths. Lucy has had 20 years as an international reporter. She's been involved in TV, news. She's got some incredible stories. I'm hoping she can share some of those with us. But then she refound herself, reinvented herself, and she has been the author of a best-selling book. She has sold 50,000 online courses, and she's coaching other people in terms of how to do that. But fundamentally, I think everything that you do, Lucy, comes down to relationship building, which is really why I've asked you to come onto this podcast. I'm hoping to learn so much from you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I only reached out to you a few days ago thinking, you're going to be really, really busy, but you've managed to squeeze us in, and I think the listeners will really, really enjoy the show, Lucy. Now, before we go any further, I want to hear about this 20 years in television. I mean, you've literally been to some of the places in this world that most people would not even dare to tread. Do you want to just talk about your career there?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to work as an international journalist for many, many years. And, you know, I started out in local newspapers and local radio. I found myself thinking, okay, I want to go and explore the world. Went off traveling and then sort of fell back into news again, but it was much more international, and Burma became a big passion of mine, Myanmar, and so would report from work in some of the refugee camps in Burma and report from Burma. I couldn't always go into the country, but I was definitely reporting on it from Thailand, and then ended up working for various TV organizations, working from Bangkok, working in Beijing. And from Beijing, I covered much of North Asia. So from Bangkok, I kind of covered Southeast Asia and would go a lot to Pakistan, Afghanistan. Yeah. And then when I was in Beijing, I was much more covering North Korea, Seoul, South Korea, Seoul, and Mongolia. And obviously China was such a fascinating time to be in China. I sort of arrived in 2007 and so saw the kind of preparations, China's ascendancy onto the world stage during the Olympics, and then obviously then subsequent things clamping down on free speech. There was definitely a moment where I got to see it was I'd say a really golden era for China.
You talk about some of these countries, and for you, I guess it's almost like it's quite natural, but for most people, they'd be listening to this and thinking, how did you survive in most of these places? I mean, there's a cultural divide, and a lot of these countries have their own very deep cultures, but there's also a lot of these countries that you've talked about, there's restrictions in terms of human rights. Burma, you talk about. I think if I remember right, Burma it's one of the most secluded countries in the world, a bit like North Korea. Not many people know exactly what's going on in Burma, but there were huge human rights issues going on in Burma at that time, weren't there?
Yeah, so I first started working there in about 2004, and yeah, it was a very repressed country. The regime had been in place for, since 1963. So it was very difficult to work and operate in the country. And you had to, you definitely had to talk in code sometimes and, arrange to meet people at certain locations. But also, mobile phones didn't work in the country. So while that was challenging, it actually also was a benefit, because it meant that while there was military intelligence following you, you could shake them off. You could find ways to communicate with people. Whereas, as technology has improved, facial recognition, mobile phone, your phones can be hacked and listened to, that actually I think it's much harder to be a journalist now in repressive regimes because of facial recognition and other technology, that I had that, I could, if I was doing a story that was quite a sensitive story, we would, take the battery out of our phones so we couldn't be hacked or listened to. We would leave our phones behind. We'd just pick up a SIM and a different phone.
This is incredible. This is like listening to one of my favourite programmes, Homeland.
Right.
It's like listening to an episode from Homeland, taking batteries out of your phone. It's like counterintelligence, counter-surveillance techniques. Did you find yourself going around roundabouts about 4 or 5 times before you peeled off a roundabout?
We wouldn't do that, but there were often times where if I was doing a sensitive story, we would take the bus rather than going by taxi or by, the office driver.
Yeah.
You'd choose other ways to kind of be able to tell those stories.
See, I guess one of the things that you've had to really learn is how to develop strong relationships built on a foundation of trust. Because let's face it, if you didn't have trust in someone in a place like Burma, you'd feel exposed and in danger all the time, wouldn't you? So what have you learned in terms of being able to build relationships in different cultures, perhaps in environments that are not necessarily as friendly as we are perhaps used to? What are your fundamentals when you're trying to develop a relationship? What is it that you're looking for? I'm
always about people's humanity, and people are people wherever they are in the world and whatever their background. I've always been, I think, a smile and just genuine, open positivity can go a long way to appeasing any situation, making people feel welcome. I've been, when you're reporting in the middle of nowhere, you can find that, some peasant who's lost everything they've lost, in the middle of China or something, and let's say there's massive floods, they've lost their homes, they've lost everything. But actually, if you can find, even if you can't communicate with them, like my Chinese is bad, and so I'd be able to speak a bit, but I wouldn't necessarily understand what they were saying back to me. And so, because the dialect was so strong. So, and even guys in the office who, are Chinese, they would struggle to understand because just dialects are so different that can, it means they don't understand every word. But it's actually that common humanity where you can smile at someone, you can make a joke, finding common language. So things like David Beckham was a huge football, I think is such a common language for so many people. You can talk about football, or the Beatles, or, just there's certain subjects that you can, I've always made an effort to learn about football and to be able to know who's at the top of the Premier League or whatever, not because I really care about that subject. It's so that I can converse with people who do care about that subject. And so it's an easy way to sort of create a commonality and have something to talk about.
You see, I love this. And of course, the podcast is called Human-Centered Leadership. And there's some wisdom to what you're saying, that the world, wherever you are, wherever you sit in the world, and actually, if you take it back into an organization, I always say, don't be frightened of the most senior leaders in the organization, because at the end of the day, they still sleep like you. They still get hungry like you. They still have interests like you. They're still human. When you have human conversations with people, and I love the fact that you're talking about things like as simple as football. I've been in countries in the world where, the only subject around football is whether you support Manchester United or Liverpool. I'm always taken aback when people in, I don't know, Mauritius or in the back end of India somewhere, and they talk about Man United and Liverpool. You realise that these subjects actually bring people together, and if you have a human-centred approach to the communication that you have with other people, you can actually build some really powerful bridges, can't you?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, people are people, and so if you can find that commonality, whether it's about families and brothers and sisters, or just being able to to be able to talk about people, about their lives, then they open up, and it makes everything else so much easier. And, even when I've definitely had moments where authority figures have not wanted me to be reporting on certain subjects, and that's been really difficult. But I was always very much, rather than kind of being difficult and arguing with them, I try and find commonality. And I often work with a colleague, David, who he spoke in, like, he'd grown up he was the son of a missionary. So he basically spoke Chinese like he'd lived in China all his life, incredible Chinese. And he'd always be able to find jokes, and we'd so even when you're being detained or you're in trouble somehow, if you can smile, if you can find laughter in those moments, and then it makes everything else so much easier. And it means that people are more likely to be human and treat you with respect as well.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said around this whole issue of smiling. And I think, when you see somebody with a genuine smile on the face, you're more likely to be to interact with that individual than to see somebody who either has a false smile that doesn't reach their eyes, as people talk about, or they have a very stern face. And I think one thing that I've about you, if anybody comes across your LinkedIn or any social media content, you always have the biggest smile, and it always attracts my attention, because it's just such a bright photo, and then you feel inclined to read the content that you've written there. So I think you're absolutely right about this smile. Smiling costs nothing, but it can be such a powerful tool in your toolbox, can't it? And so you've gone all over the world. You've spoken to all sorts of people. You've learned to work within cultures and maybe some challenging environments. And you've relied upon this human intellect of yours, your humanity, if you like, and to communicate at the most basic of levels. You've built these skill sets, and I think what you've done is you've carried these skill sets on with everything else that you've done, and I think it's really shining bright for you now, that you've almost got this Midas touch, that whatever you do seems to turn to gold. I mean, you wrote a book which became a bestseller. Do you want to just tell us about the book, and how was that your first book, and what it felt like to get that book out there, and how you managed to get it to be a bestseller?
So my book is called Make Money While You Sleep. And essentially, I have been, so since 2017, I've been selling online courses. I sort of was doing joint ventures with various people, different brands, different influencers, to help them create courses and doing a joint venture. And I was also working with people to help them create their own courses, so small business owners or people in the corporate world who wanted to kind of, create passive income and escape the 9-to-5. I was approached by one influencer that I was working with by her agent, and it was literally just so March 2020, it was probably my last meeting in London before I kind of was like, oh, I better not go into London anymore. And she said, would I be interested? I said, yeah. She said, write a proposal. And then, of course, homeschooling and COVID kicked in. And so I was in the throes of, homeschooling and trying to juggle everything and keep my business going and all those things that, life throws at you. So I didn't really pick it up till, sort of, I guess in the summer holidays. I thought, you know what, we went away to Italy for 6 weeks, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna write it while we're in. So I'd get up at 5 and write before my son woke up, and so I got 3 chapters done in a proposal, 2 chapters. Joe, my agent, went through this, submitted it, and then by the time it was, we back and forth, whatever. So she submitted it January 21, and literally the next day, Bryony, my editor, saw it, liked it, and said, I love this. Here's a deal. But they call it an on the table deal, where essentially you have to say yes by the end of that day. And one of the conditions was that I had to write it by July the 7th. So this was February 21.
How much had you written by the time that the on the table deal came through?
So I'd written 2 chapters. That was just the proposal. That was it. And we were literally about to move house from London. We were living in central London, and we were going to move to the Cotswolds.
There's a bit of a theme here, isn't there, Lucy, that you just like to take things on and, you maybe run 3 or 4 major projects at the same time.
So literally, and with homeschooling as well, because we were all in lockdown. So I thought, okay. So I thought, well, I'd planned out 12 chapters. 2 were pretty much there, written. I did have to work on them a bit, but essentially I gave myself 12 weeks once my son went back to school. So March 8th, he went back to school, and I wrote a chapter a week. I'd write every Thursday, Friday, and then do my business the first 3 days of the week, and then sort of be there for my son. And
so would you be writing all day Thursday, all day Friday, would you?
Yes. I mean, often Thursdays were kind of faff around, procrastinate, and then Friday would be, oh my God, I've got a chapter to write.
I love that. That's me, definitely.
So, but I would get it done, and so I hit the deadline of July the 7th. So I wrote 12 chapters in 12 weeks.
I take my hat off to you. I mean, we're not worthy. That is incredible to have written a book in 12 weeks with the pressure of a contract behind it all.
Yeah. So it was intense, to say the least. And then, so the book came out end of December. So basically beginning of this year. It did really well. I was so lucky that we had, a really good marketing campaign, great PR. So I got to be on various TV shows and in lots of newspapers, and that really helped sell things. LinkedIn was brilliant. Leah Turner was amazing at kind of promoting it for me, which was really sweet of her. And so that really helped with book sales. And it's been released in the US, and it's on sale in there's this China version that's just about to be published, and it's selling in India, in Germany, and multiple countries around the world. I've lost track of how many countries.
That's absolutely fantastic, Lucy, and well deserved. I must grab myself a copy of that book. I know it's going to be full of value, because what you talk about in the book, I guess, is about your own success with online courses. You started in an online course. Was it back in 2017, did you say?
The first course I created was 2017. So I'd had 20 years in TV. And when my son was born, my last assignment was working in Ukraine. I was pregnant in 2014, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. So
you were in Ukraine. I'm guessing you were covering the Crimean crisis then.
Yes.
And you were pregnant.
Yes.
So you're in the middle of a war-torn country, pregnant. I mean,
and I don't
know whether you're mad or just incredible.
Yeah, it was definitely something I didn't enjoy, and I thought, I don't want to do this anymore. It was really that moment of, I have friends who were pregnant and felt the need to carry on, and I have friends who still work in like Clarissa Ward from CNN. She leaves her kids and she'll go and report from Afghanistan, and her reporting is incredible, and she brings such humanity to it because I think because she has children, there's an added rawness and a tenderness. But for me, I didn't want to do it anymore. It was just not. I wanted to be there for my son, but I had to work out what I was going to do next. And I really felt unemployable because I had such a sort of specific niche career that it didn't seem to fit into a box. And that was definitely like, okay, what am I going to do?
I hear this with so many people who have been in these kind of careers. I hear this. I mean, I'm a former police officer, and I hear this with a lot of police officers who have had 30 years in the police service and say, well, what can I do now? And what people don't realize, you've got incredible transferable skills, which you demonstrated, didn't you, with the work that you did?
Yeah, but when you're in that situation, it does feel like, what am I going to do? I don't tick a box. I don't have the kind of network you need to work in, whatever industry it may be. And so for me, I felt like setting up my own business was the only way that I could kind of leap that just avoid having to apply for jobs where I didn't have that network, or all of those things. And so while setting up my own business was a challenge, that was a massive motivator to say, okay, there isn't a plan B. I've got to make this work. The other thing for me was, when my son was born, I had chronic incontinence. So it meant that I couldn't go back to work. I couldn't work in an office, because I would, like, if I walked down the street, I would pee myself. And so I couldn't go and work in an office, because that wouldn't work for me. And so I needed to have a work from home job. And so that was another reason to kind of do something that really fitted around my life and my health. For you to have come away from this 20-year career where you were literally at the front line of so much excitement. I mean, I know that it was full of fraught with danger and fear, but excitement. And then for you to stop all of that, all of a sudden make this conscious decision, say, right, enough's enough, but now I need to do something else. That takes courage. You must have felt frightened, and with the responsibility of knowing that you've now got this business you've got to make, you must have been petrified and had some sleepless nights and all these kind of stuff. Yeah, I think so. When I was on maternity leave, I set up an Airbnb. So the flat that we lived in Notting Hill, I turned that into an Airbnb, and that gave a base level of income. So that was definitely, and so I was, I enjoyed that. I didn't really enjoy the admin, but I enjoyed kind of the creativity of that. And that gave me breathing space to then figure out, okay, what's next? And from that, then I started working with, I'd done work anyway with CEOs about being confident on camera and presenting and telling stories. So that was easy. What the challenge for me was, when I was doing those days of filming, that didn't work with childcare. It wasn't very flexible. And so that's why courses were so much better, because it meant that I could put all my energy into that, and then they would basically sell themselves through Facebook ads. They sold themselves. And so, I was selling, able to turn over, we were sort of, selling, if you were putting down a certain amount of money on revenue, you were getting 3 times the return through Facebook ads. So it was an incredible way to have a really thriving business, very, very simply. I mean, that's fascinating. But a lot of people listening to this now who maybe have thought about doing some online courses, or maybe trying to get into social media ads, they're not that easy, are they? In the sense that there is a science behind it. What would be the things that you have learned? I mean, your first course, if I remember, was in 2017, priced at $19.99. But then was it that one that you sold 50,000 of? Yeah, so I've got a $19 course called Confident on Camera, and that sold, getting on for 60,000 courses now, and that is. Essentially that's kind of a gateway product. So what you do is you're selling people into that, and then you're upselling them into other products and services. So whether that's your membership, whether that's your other higher priced courses. So I have a YouTube course, or other, a course about creating courses, and they're priced at different price points. And so, but you've brought people into your world, because, if you're spending, let's say, $10 to get a lead on Facebook, but the course, but they're spending, so you're spending $10, you're getting back 19, they're spending 19, so you keep 9 profit for yourself, and then they're maybe buying other courses. So, 50% of people were buying another course that I had. And so all of that is additional revenue that's coming into the business.
You see, for me, there's this human-centered leadership approach to all of this. This is about communicating. So, when you were a reporter traveling the world, you were connecting to people from all sorts of cultures around in the context of football, smiling, this human behavior. In the written word, because that's what we're talking about here, you are basically trying to encourage strangers who've perhaps never even heard of you to buy your product online without ever having met you, without ever having experienced you. What have you learnt in terms of the written word that connects people towards you? What's the secret, would you say?
I think telling stories that, authenticity is such an overused word, but having a realness, having a rawness. So being vulnerable is really important. So, I think back in, when I first started doing all of this, like 2016, I'd never written about myself before. I could easily write about, politics of North Korea or what was happening in some kind of state legislature in China, or when I worked in Iraq, about bomb blasts or whatever it may be. And then suddenly to go from talking about myself felt really vacuous and kind of, I can't talk about myself. And so that's been the journey, talking about yourself. But it's kind of a muscle. The more you do it, the more it gets easier. So I tell stories like of how I'm feeling. I'm in the process of going through a divorce, so I might talk about that. And while people might say, stop talking about that,
I'll be honest with you, I love reading what you write, and sometimes it's the most simplistic of things, but the way you couch it is just, it resonates. It sits comfortably with people. And it comes back to what you said earlier on. People are human beings. Other people will be going through divorce. Other people have moments of self-doubt, incredible imposter syndrome. I have that all the time. We all do. And to hear somebody else who's doing well to be going through exactly that, you think, phew, it's not so bad then, if Lucy's going through it, then I'm going through it, then I feel okay. And I think there's such a strength in vulnerability. And, I do a lot of work with organizations around culture. And I say, you need to build a foundation of trust, but you can only truly build a foundation of trust when there's vulnerability. And I think that's what you do so very well.
Yeah, I think being vulnerable rather than, I think social media maybe 5 years ago was about, you'd sort of have some picture where, it was a kind of mask, and you'd say, oh, I'm, this, that, and the other, aren't I amazing? And I don't think people are tired and bored of that. And so they want realness. So that means being able to tell those stories that are uncomfortable. And actually there is so much power in sharing stories of things that are your biggest weaknesses, like, my talking about incontinence or things like that. You might think, how on earth can you do that? But actually, by talking about it, it gives you power, because then it no longer is something you fear. It's no longer something that is awkward. And it's like, well, this is the reality, but this is how I've overcome it. And so suddenly it's a strength. It's something that you have dealt with, overcome. Other people can see, wow, they're dealing with that situation, but they're still doing all of these things. And that gives you a power in the workplace. And, wherever you are, you can then, it means that it's liberating rather than it being something that confines you and holds you back. It's the opposite.
I hope the listeners have taken away so much value. I don't know what particular aspect of our conversation would have resonated more, because there's so much depth to what we've talked about today. But I think if I were to pull all this together, the key messaging is be human. Be human, connect with people at their level, and remember that everybody pretty much has the same sort of mindset wherever we go, the same concerns, the same aspirations, the same dreams, and the same interests, largely, wherever you go in the world. So connect with people as human beings.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Honestly, I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much.